We do know that. We certainly know that.
Imagine if it were.
Absolutely. But no, there is an audience for this, and it just needs to be kind of underscored that for gun owners and for folks that are in gun culture who are like, no, this is not who we are. Hearing some of those voices in this conversation, I think is going to be important too.
Look, there's another part of this, Ashley. It's what the school did and did not do. And look, I have family that works in school systems. The pressure school administrators are feeling from parents, and this set of parents said, "Don't take my kid out of school." And administrators are afraid. Parents are angry. They're in a tough place too.
They absolutely are. They've already ordered up an investigation of what's happened. My understanding is it's as rare as it is to charge parents. It is incredibly rare for a school to actually be held accountable. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be lawsuits and other...
Maybe individuals get held accountable.
Yes, yeah. and other steps against them. But it is an incredibly tricky position, and you also find that schools, that parents, that all of these things in the margins are coming under question because the big issue, which is should kids who are mentally troubled have access to guns, Congress simply can't address that.
But teachers are also in a tricky position in this too, right? What about the teacher that raised, that said, Ethan Crumbly is monitoring ammo on his phone. She tried to raise the alarm,
and it didn't.
That
and
didn't
not enough
go
people
anywhere.
listen. Well, we had a lot of light subjects for you today: abortion, guns, and COVID. But thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
The Meet the Press Roundtable includes Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Ashley Parker, Politico Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, Stephen Hayes, founder of The Dispatch, and Aaron Haynes, editor-at-large of The 19th.
This week on C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast, a class on how pilgrims became part of the United States' founding story in 19th century history textbooks. Professor Abram Van Eggen of Washington University describes why early historians and educators emphasized the Pilgrims' Plymouth colony over earlier settlements such as Jamestown in Virginia.
She paints on the map a Dutch ship with Negroes from Africa purchased by the colony of Jamestown. So insofar as Jamestown appears on any map in our history, it appears as associated with slavery, right? Which is why it's not she doesn't want it to be a turning point in American history. Because if it's the turning point in American history, you can't not talk about slavery, right? But if you say that the Pilgrims came here for freedom, then you can first of all ignore the fact that Pilgrims and Puritans in New England had slaves, which they did. And second of all, you can say that whole slavery business is not part of the essential identity of America.
Lectures in History is a weekly podcast taking you to the classrooms of some of the country's leading universities. Please find it and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio is a wrap-up of the day's events from the nation's capital, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Hear the latest from the White House, Senate, and the House, including congressional hearings, news conferences, and politics. Washington Today also features journalist interviews on issues of the day. Washington Today, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Available on C-SPAN Radio and also as a podcast. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow so you never miss an episode.
Monday morning, Delaware Senator Chris Coons and Texas Congressman Michael McCall take part in a conversation on promoting democracy hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Live coverage begins at 10 Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or watch full coverage on C-SPAN Now, our new video app. On Monday, a discussion with Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy on congressional war powers and potential presidential overreach. Live coverage from the Cato Institute begins at noon Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or watch full coverage on C-SPAN Now, our new video app.
We continue the Sunday shows at the top of the hour. Until then, a portion of Sunday's Washington Journal.
We're back, and we're going discussion of the Biden agenda and the campaigns 2022 and 2024. Joining us this morning are B.J. Martino, Republican pollster and partner with the Terrence Group, and Jim Manley, who is a Democratic strategist and senior counsel at APCO Worldwide. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Jesse.
All right, so first of all, let's look at the most recent job numbers, and I want you two to tell me how this affects the Biden agenda and the upcoming election. Look, we'll go to the Wall Street Journal story that says, hiring slowed last month amid COVID-19 uncertainties, but people returned to the labor force in droves in a sign that the tight labor market could be loosening. The U.S. economy added a seasonally adjusted 210,000 jobs in November, the smallest gain since last December, and a marked slowdown from an upwardly revised increase of 546,000 in October. BJ, what do those job numbers tell us about the Biden agenda right now?
Well, it tells us that those numbers aren't going to do anything to help Biden's standing with the American electorate. I mean, when you look at his job approval rating, it continues to hover in the low 40s. And to get a jobs number back that is less than half of the expected number shown for the month is not going to improve that. And it's going to have an impact on his capacity to get things done on the Hill, which hasn't shown much capacity to do that yet. But it's also going to continue to drive this sense of disappointment that is even existing among his own Democratic base. When we look at the numbers overall, that 42% roughly who approve of the job he's doing overall, among base Democratic voters, even that number is, in the 80s. It's not a bad number for a president with his base, but it lacks intensity. And when you look underneath the hood of that approval from Democrats, you see only about half of his Democratic base actually strongly approve of the job he's doing. There is a growing sense of disappointment over the lack of this administration's ability to actually get things done. And it starts with the base, but it spreads clearly out among independent voters, and Republicans have obviously been there for a long time.
Jim, is BJ right?
With all due respect, no, I don't think. Well, some of what he's saying is correct, but I'd say it slightly differently. First of all, number one, the top line number that was reported out of that jobs report was disappointing. There's no doubt about it. But also got kind of lost to the message there is that the unemployment rate continued to tick down to a pretty impressive 4.2, I believe it was, percent. And three, I'd say, to the extent that you can look ahead to next year, the election, it is going to revolve around the economy and to a lesser degree COVID. A key part of getting the economy in place is continued efforts to try and wrestle this, COVID disease or infection, to a place where everyone can feel more comfortable getting out. But, and again, we can spend hours talking about the minutia of the numbers. What's interesting, we've seen in the last couple months, there's been so-called revisions of previous numbers that keep on spiking up in a pretty dramatic fashion. I'm no expert on how to analyze these numbers, but it sure seems to me that the numbers that keep on getting reported are change and or revise in the next couple months, or a couple months later, and it showed, and they keep on showing that the economy is in a pretty decent spot all in all, though there are still problems. There's no doubt about it, and every Democrat on Capitol Hill's got to recognize that.
Jim, at what point do we start blaming the current administration and stop saying, well, it's COVID causing the problem? Are you worried about voters saying, well, no, it's not COVID, it's the political leadership?
Fair question. I think that this, COVID is such a tricky thing, and it has such an impact on the economy. I think it's, I think that, this administration has done a heck of a lot better than, the previous administration. And, throw in the fact at the risk of sparking a political war about how a lot of Republicans are trying to talk down this thing and trying to do everything they can to try and undermine, what the administration's trying to do when it comes to dealing with the COVID. And, I think the administration's done a good job, but they're going to own it. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's the bottom line. And yes, the buck stops at the White House. But the buck stops with the president. But again, my issue is that Republicans are doing everything they can to try and undermine what the president wants to do. Just this week in the Senate, we saw another vote in the Senate to try and eliminate mandates. Thankfully lost, but there's going to be, in fact, there's going to be another vote next week using a expedited procedure.
BJ, at what point do you think that the voters will say, well, the COVID pandemic caused a lot of these issues? Maybe it wasn't the political leadership. Maybe this was just an extraordinary time, and we should give them another chance.
Well, there's certainly a sense for the first 6 months of a presidency that voters have the capacity to say, listen, the problems that exist in these first 6 months are not owned by this current administration. They are willing to give that level of grace, and that is part of the honeymoon period of any new presidency. Unfortunately for the Biden administration, what happened after those first 6 months was Afghanistan. And that not only in an issue in and of itself began to erode trust in the faith of this administration.
WCSP